This episode is brought to you by Studiosity. Real learning happens through real thinking and real experiences. It's something that takes effort, not shortcuts. For over 20 years, Studiosity has partnered with educators to protect the thinking, the essential work that the student must do for themselves. Not detection, not an us versus them culture in teaching and learning, just the real journey behind every degree that is worth holding. They're doing it for the institutions that trust their students, for the institutions that back their teachers to teach, not police, and for the institutions that stand behind their degrees. Keep the learning real with Studiosity. Get the walkthrough at studiosity.com/learning curve. Hello and welcome to Learning Curve, a look at education's struggle to adapt to the AI era. I'm Jeff Young, a longtime education journalist. The college admissions process has long been stressful for students. And these days, the rise of generative AI is adding a new layer of anxiety. For students applying to selective colleges, it was already hard to tell how to make your application rise above the others, and how the colleges were deciding who gets each coveted slot. These days, students applying to college are also wondering whether they should use AI to polish and improve their admissions essays. Will doing that show colleges that they're able to use the latest tools to better make their case? Or will the college ding their application if they sense a bot is doing the writing? And to complicate things, a growing number of colleges are turning to AI themselves, using new AI tools to summarize applicant essays and even score them. For this episode of Learning Curve, I'm diving into this issue of how AI is changing the college admissions process. And we'll hear from two experts today. A veteran college enrollment official who's leading an AI experiment at his university, and an admissions consultant who has changed her mind about what she advises applicants to do when it comes to AI. First, I was curious to hear from a selective university that has gone all in with AI in admissions. That institution is Virginia Tech, where for the first time this admission cycle, AI became a major part of screening admissions applications. And here is a part we'll dig into. The hope is that AI will free up time for human professors and admissions folks to interact more with students. To learn all about that, I connected with Juan Espinoza, Virginia Tech's Vice Provost of Enrollment Management. And I started my conversation with Juan Espinoza by asking him to remind us how different things were just 10 years ago, and how things were changing even before generative AI emerged.
Yeah, it was a different time for sure. When you think of just from a student perspective, how many applications were being sent out? I think the average, 20 years ago was 3 to 5. And if you rewind to that time, you often heard of strategies shared by counselors in which you should have one reach school, one school that you think you were well positioned for admissions wise, and then the safety school. And so that usually was 3. And if there was any sort of, question on where one of those schools, fell into that, then that's where you would add another school to kind of, make sure you were well represented in that area. And so that's where you got to that higher end of 5. 3 to
5 schools
was kind of what it is. And the other day I spoke to a student, I guess it's been a few months now, and I asked, how many applications did you send out? And they said, I sent out 35 applications.
Wow.
And that's not rare to hear anymore because a lot of colleges, and this is a good thing, have been focusing on trying to streamline their application process. And now you have
to make it easier to apply.
Yeah. And you have shared application platforms now that are readily available that make it really easy to send applications. And now you have a newer thing in the last few years, direct admission, where you're getting offered before you even submit an application. And so
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So these students haven't even applied and they're getting a note saying you're in.
Yeah, you're in. You just got to, circle back and give us a little bit more, information.
Now you should apply.
Yeah. And so I think And it's so interesting too from a student perspective. So my kid just went through this process a couple years ago. She's a sophomore at James Madison University, which is just right up the road from where we are in Blacksburg. And it's just so interesting to hear the anxiety of students as they navigate through this process because they're hearing from the institution side, this is a record year of applications, year after year after year. Even with the whole enrollment cliff conversation in the background, we're still
Yeah, there's supposed to be
hearing
less students, and yet
yeah, but we're
yeah.
hearing record application, year after year, and it's because students are freaked out, and they think that it's really hard to get into college now, and
Well, that's
so
what they've been told the
yeah,
whole
and so
high
they're gonna
school time.
hedge their bets and send more applications out, and it's easier to do that now more than ever before. And so it's almost a self-fulfilling, prophecy in a way because as there's more applications going out, the offer rates are dropping, yield rates are going the other way, right? Because at the end of the day, you can only be at one place in the fall, and with the population declines that we're expecting and we're starting to see this year, I think yield rates will continue to drop.
The yield rate just means how many accepted students ended up attending. In other words, what percent of the students who got a yes ended up showing up on campus. One issue for colleges in all this is how do you plan for your class when so many students applied but may not have that much interest in coming because they have other schools that they're more excited about and might get into.
There's no normal year in admissions anymore. Ever since the pandemic, it seems like each year comes with its own set of challenges, and so it's just difficult. And so going, to your initial question, rewinding, back to when I first started in this field, it's a very different profession in some ways, not entirely. But when I think of kind of those revered names, those admissions leaders that were so well respected across the country when I first entered the profession, and I was lucky to work with one of them, Dave Kraus.
Mm.
It was very heavily built on relationships. And that's not to say relationships don't matter today and how we do admissions, but you saw kind of a transition from very heavily focused on relationships only to more of a data informed and even in some cases data driven focus in the admissions field because you had to with the volume of applications that were coming in, the changes in offer rates, changes in yield rates, all these new variables coming in from a data standpoint which we honestly didn't have access to several years prior. And so you had to start paying attention to this. And then it started creeping into how you predicted your class. And then you start having machine learning have a larger presence in some of your predictive modeling. And so it ended up opening some doors for newer leaders in the admissions profession to have a very heavy data background to help kind of decipher through all this metadata, which all professions kind of went through that in some ways. How you're going to dig through this data and find relevant patterns that are going to allow you to put your institution in the best strategic position moving forward.
You say all professions have this, but I think it seems fair to say from watching college admissions in the last decade, I mean, enter the quants, like people that
Yep.
were like data because like you said, there was suddenly more data, more processing of data. Um, I want to first back up to the relationships.
Yeah.
Describe that relationship. What do you mean by that? I think some people may not understand which relationships you mean and how that worked.
Yeah. When I first entered the profession, if you were going to make goal, you had to meet with students and find them where they were at. Relationships with counselors were critical to the
So
success.
you are going to high school
You're
counselors
going to
talking to
high
them.
schools, you're doing high school visits, you're standing behind the table, you're at college fairs. That was a huge part, if not the biggest part of the strategy itself. And in many ways, it wasn't data informed or data driven to the level it is today because it was more of a we had to be at as many places as possible, right? And then as this more data informed process came in, colleges started paying more attention to all right, where are we seeing some good responses from different markets when we're visiting those? And then you kind of broaden that across the entire country and in some cases across the world. Then you start strategically doing some more surgical strikes on when you're sending counselors. And then when you start using data segmentation, we're able to look at, hey, we need to build a larger presence, let's say in the Houston area. You're using data segmentation in a way of, hey, here's certain neighborhoods within that area that align with variables that we think will lead to a higher mobility of students willing to go out of state and consider Virginia Tech. And so you just peel additional layer until you really find a group that you're like, this is where we need to be. Where in the old days, when I first started, it would be like, we need to build our presence in Houston. Let's go visit every high school in Houston and try to get traction. Now it's like, we need to visit 5 schools in Houston. And, once they're done, they move on to another city because the data shows these are the schools that are going to have the most traction in our messaging and in our program offerings. And that's who we need to talk to and then move on to the next city.
I'm not sure the average student applying to college these days understands how much number crunching goes into how the colleges are seeking them out. I noticed that Juan used the term surgical strikes to describe their data use. It's probably not a perfect comparison, but I keep thinking about that baseball book, Moneyball, which outlines how more sophisticated use of statistics by teams like the Oakland A's revolutionized scouting in baseball in a way that has been happening over the years in admissions. And that was before generative AI. So for years before generative AI, colleges were looking for ways to use earlier forms of AI algorithms to predict which applicants who applied would actually accept if given an offer. Meanwhile, there have been other changes. Since 2018, Virginia Tech revamped its application to try to get to know its applicants better, adding 4 short essay questions to their application. The questions center around the university's motto, Ut Prosim, which is Latin for that I may serve. So one question is, share how you contribute to a community that is important to you. Another is, share a time when you were most proud of yourself, either as a role model or when you displayed your leadership. The answers must be really short. Each one is limited to 120 words. Just 120 words to answer each of these 4 questions.
Give the student an opportunity to tell their story, tell where they were coming from, and talk about some of their experiences. And that was so important because at that time we only had about 31,000 applications. But the pool was very homogeneous. Our average GPA was about a 4.0 at that time. Well, the average GPA for the applicant pool was about a 4.0 at that time. We were getting applications from students that thought they could get in. And so we needed an additional lens to help differentiate through that pool, and the non-cognitive attributes allowed us to do that. They were hugely successful. We saw great gains with retention, progression, graduation rates since the introduction of it. We felt that was really the missing piece in our review process.
The downside of this approach is that having these 4 short essay questions, even though the answers are super short, it's labor-intensive to score. Since they adopted the system, it has taken a massive effort each year.
We trained about 200 to 300 readers that were representatives from our community to read the essay questions. So this is separate from our admissions committee. We had a whole group trained just to read essay questions, and we created a review platform where they would be able to see the question and the answer that was submitted, but no personally identifying information of any kind, all right, to minimize bias. And we set that up, and the system we set up required each essay prompt to have 2 readers. And then if the difference of scoring was more than 4 points, a third reader would kick in, and then the scores would be averaged.
So there's a lot of human time. At an online portal that just they crank through looking at applicant
So about
essays.
500,000 essay prompts needed to be read as we saw the application. 500,000.
Right.
once you counted how many times each essay had to be read and the average third reader, that comes out to about 16,000 hours. It was something we believed in, something that showed was tied to our recent success, but it was slowing us down. So each passing year, as our applications grew from 30,000 to the most recent year, we're approaching about 60,000. We're about 58,000 applications. That was more and more essays to read.
So when you double your applications, the old system was straining.
Yeah, it was training. And so we had to make a decision. Are we going to discontinue this? Because we were getting feedback from our applicant pool that we're taking too long. You're the last school in Virginia to let me know if I'm getting in or not. You're letting us know in March, and other schools are letting us know weeks ahead of time. And so it was putting us at a disadvantage, even though we believed it. And around that time, one of our readers, our volunteer readers, was a faculty member. His name is Dr. Lewis Hickman. He came out and said, "You know what? I've got a lot of background in AI," this was about 4 years ago, give or take. Uh,
Right. So
eh
before ChatGPT was a
Yeah,
big,
yeah.
yeah.
So, it's kind of a foreign thing for a lot of people. He said, "I've got, some research in AI. I'm a linguist by training, but I've got a lot of, background in AI. I think I can help with your problem, and try to create a AI companion tool with my research team." At that time, it was like, "All right, let me help this guy out. He needs data. He's trying to do some research. We can partner on this." I honestly had no expectation this would be something we would ever implement, to be quite honest with you.
Oh, wow. So you're like, let's help the linguist out.
Yeah, exactly. And so we engage with him. The first year we get results and they're okay. And it was interesting because he was trying to create something that essentially was replicating a human reader. Like, and he was part of a published article that was showing a lot of weaknesses in that approach. In that, if you're training in an AI tool to try to be human, it's really, really difficult. So the
Sure.
second year, he moved to more of a tool that focused on patterns, combinations of words, and this and that. What leads to a 3, which is the highest score? What leads to a 0 for the lowest score for each essay? And we saw a significant increase in the productivity of that tool almost immediately. And then, it became the cold question of how do you manage bias, right? And that's
Mm.
really tricky when you're dealing with AI and a huge concern. And so it was quite brilliant what he did. He moved to an ensemble of using LLM. So just like when you ask only one person a perspective, then your answer is going to be heavily, dictated by that person. When you ask a group of people, you start limiting any sort of bias and different perspectives are more varied and stronger for that. He did the same thing with LLM. So instead of just asking one LLM, he created an ensemble to get different perspectives to the point where we
So it's like ask ChatGPT and Claude
yeah,
and
different
Gemini.
LLMs and so, by doing that, you remove the need to do any de-bias, process at all
Mm.
because it varied and showed no, subgroups were at a disadvantage, was fantastic. It really simplified the work. Now, I'll be clear, we don't put this in ChatGPT. These are on-premise LLMs that we have, on campus or we went through the whole division of IT, audit, making sure that everyone felt comfortable. It was great. We weren't working with any vendors, so this all stayed within the Virginia Tech ecosystem from an IT standpoint. And by the third year, it was producing data we could not ignore anymore. It was doing just as well, if not better, than our human readers when looking at disagreement rates. And it was able to average an essay read in 1.8 seconds versus the 2 minutes our human readers were taking. And so,
1.8 seconds
yeah,
versus 2 minutes. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like the experience we all have when these
yeah.
chatbots spit out so fast. You're like, "Wait, you just wrote my paper." Whoa.
Yeah. So it just got to the point of we got to do this. The provost at the time was supportive of it. The president, Dr. Tim Sands, was like, "This is exciting. I know there's risk being the first in a lot of cases to embrace technology, but I think this is a win-win." And that's when we started realizing the question wasn't, "Are we going to do this?" but "How are we going to do it?" And I felt strongly, so strongly, that we had to be transparent. I think that there is such mistrust right now in AI that
Mhm.
you're only going to contribute to that mistrust if you as an institution aren't being clear on how you're going to utilize it in the application process. So I know publicly we were essentially the first to announce we were using it. But I question if we truly were the first, if there were others that are already utilizing it in some way, but kind of behind the curtain.
Sure.
And
Sure. So,
I think
but you thought it was important to say this is what we're doing.
so important because, the admissions offices in general, they kind of have a reputation of being, very vague on how things and decisions are made, it's a lot of behind the curtain type stuff. And I really feel that since we've started working as a team here at admissions with that as a key principle, we try really hard to explain to the public how we make decisions because it's our goal that expectations are aligned with the decision they ultimately get. If a student is surprised by their decision, in some ways that's a failing on our side and not communicating effectively how we make decisions and what variables are important to us. And in a lot of ways, I feel that there's a high level of trust the student and really the family give when they submit an application to a college that their application will be handled with care. And we need to honor that trust. So that transparency piece was really important. The second pillar in all of this was making sure that we weren't simply handing this over to AI, that we were going to have a human safeguards throughout the process. But
What does
more
that look
important,
like? What does that look like in this
well,
case?
that means in our new system, we still have a human reader, and then we have the AI tool. And if there's a discrepancy and we reduce that discrepancy, which previously was 4 points to trigger a third reader, now it's just 2 points. And that third reader remains a human. Those are the human safeguards there. But then ultimately, the admissions decision is still 100% handled by humans on the admissions committee. So here's a subsection of the group that score is imported, and you have that human safeguard in multiple ways. That score is imported for the admissions committee to review, and then that's part of the one of many variables that they're reviewing as part of that process.
So the AI is one
Remains
of the two.
central.
The AI is one of the in the old system two human readers of these essay questions.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay,
And,
and
and I, and I think that's so critical. I really think that's critical because I think right now the perception and the reality for some companies and organizations that are utilizing AI is motivation is efficiency. And it's almost a race of how can we cut costs. And I think that's a race to the bottom. And it's losing sight in what the gain is. And that is as we gain some efficiencies. So in our case, 8,000 human hours are being saved. Question is, what are we gonna do with those hours? How are we gonna
that
repurpose that to the student's advantage and betterment, from an experience standpoint? I think that cannot be lost in all of this.
what do you do with the 8,000 saved hours?
You connect with students. I mean, that's so all the volunteers that we had reading essays, we're trying to think, how can we make sure that they're still engaged in this process, but maybe they're more available to talk to students. I tell people all the time during the application process, admissions counselors, research show, are always top three on who students want to talk to.
Mhm.
Once they're offered admission, we drop to 17. Who do they want to talk to once they're in? They want to talk to students, they want to talk to faculty, and they want to talk to alums.
So
And
what does that look like, those relationships? Because I am interested in this. So you're saying hopefully you could have that, or are you actually doing it? The
we're
saved human time.
so this was our first cycle, so we're still in the process of trying to see, how are we going to be able to do this. But yes, we are going to find ways to connect our faculty because those are the biggest portion of our readers that were reading the essay questions. Trying to find new opportunities for them to connect with students. Try to integrate that into our visitor experience. Try to have more time with them and the student because we think that one, they showed a capacity to help out. They have the time. They identified that time. And we're going to give them something much more exciting to do than just reading essay questions. We're going to connect them with students that are considering Virginia Tech. And I think and we're going to be strategic on when that happens. It's going to be after the student is offered, but we feel that that's going to have a much larger impact in the long term than sticking to our old system and just having them read essays only.
So to be clear, AI is now doing some of the review of applications at Virginia Tech, so that the human reviewers spend less time per applicant on the review process. But officials are hoping to use the time AI saves so that they can redeploy those professors and officials to do new things that only humans can do. I think it's worth noting that Virginia Tech still hasn't figured out exactly what that thing is, and I'm curious what they come up with that will work. Busy professors could score admissions essays on their own time, sneaking in a few minutes here or there in their busy schedules, but interacting with students, as Juan Espinosa described, might prove hard to work out the logistics for. Now, how do students feel about this? What has their reaction been to Virginia Tech bringing in this layer of AI review? We'll get to that right after the break. This episode was brought to you by Studiosity. Real learning needs a struggle. But for educators, assessment security just means more detective work. And that's not what students came for. And it's not what the teachers came for. True learning and authorship isn't found in a probability score or a surveillance log. It's found in the journey. Studiosity makes assessment security easy by shifting the burden away from every educator and into a proactive, institution-wide infrastructure. From Viva-style inputs to clear binary validity reporting, Studiosity is the multi-layered assessment security process, turning institutional policy into practice. Just a clear signal to the teacher, owned by the student, that I did this thinking. De-risk your assessment flow and reduce workload. Give your teachers back the time to teach, not police. And give your students the agency to show their own growth. Keep the learning real with Studiosity. Get the walkthrough at studiosity.com/learning curve. That's studiosity.com/learning curve. Now back to the episode. Okay, before we actually do get back into it, I wanted to remind you about a new newsletter that I started about AI at colleges for the Chronicle of Higher Education. It's called Jagged Intelligence. On the latest installment, I looked at how colleges are reacting to the Pope's recent take on AI, rounded up the latest news on which colleges have signed big deals with AI companies, and linked to a new crowdsourced tracker of practical ways that colleges are adopting AI on their campuses. If you haven't already, I hope you will head over to chronicle.com and click on the word newsletters at the top to sign up. Okay, let's get back to the thorny issue of AI in college admissions. You know, I have to ask, a lot of times students feel like they're being told all over the place not to use AI. Because, it's cheating, it's not being human, and these are real concerns. I'm not trying to minimize this. And at the same time, here you are as this esteemed institution using AI to replace part of a human job that professors were doing. So how do you square that? What do you say to a student who might be throwing their hands up and be like, wow, like I see what you're saying, but you're still using a robot to do what a human did, and you're advising me not to do that.
Well, what we do, and I think this is so important as part of the trust piece, we're communicating what they get out of this. And what they get out of this is they get a decision much sooner than ever before. So we were able to shave 5 weeks out of our review process. So instead of getting decisions out in March, we got them out, I think it was around the 3rd week in January. So that was a direct benefit for them. Number 2, we tell them to use it as a brainstorming tool, actually. We're not...
Okay, so you're not saying no
We're not
AI.
saying don't use AI. We're not saying that. We're saying our strong recommendation, because how we just explained what we're looking for, the answers are tied to your experience and your characteristics. So I would argue you would be at a disadvantage for just throwing this into ChatGPT and expecting you're going to get the highest score out of that. That's not going to happen. But if you want to use it for brainstorming, if you want to use it as a reflection piece, go ahead and do it. We encourage it, because the reality is AI is not going anywhere. And what we're seeing from our employers is they're expecting a certain level of fluency. So we don't want to discourage from it. Now, I hear lots of different perspectives on what we're doing at Virginia Tech from outsiders. Are we using this to detect AI? No, we're not. We're not interested.
Okay, so you don't have some AI detector machine in there.
I think that's a waste of time, because of how quickly this is advancing. Whatever you're using to try to detect AI is going to be out of date, in probably a few days. And so it's
So you don't take into account whether it feels human or bot, like the essays.
what we're taking into account, what our human readers and what the AI tool, which was trained on several years, 7 admission cycles of previous readers, and what patterns led to a higher score, as I explained earlier. What we're hoping to get to is the student's story. And I would argue, as good as AI is right now, it hasn't been able to replicate us, right? It's really good at lots of things, but being human isn't one of those things yet. All right, I might stand corrected many years from now, but as of
Oh,
right
I
now, it's
hope we can stay, different.
not.
Okay.
And so that's where our advice is. It's in your best interest to answer this. Now, these are short answer essays.
Give me an example. Give me a flavor. I can picture it, I think, but
So one of the questions is we ask, "What are your goals?" All right. And so you put that into ChatGPT, it doesn't know who you are. It's gonna spit out as a bunch of goals, but is it really what you wanna do? And are those goals gonna be focused on the long term? Because when we ask that question, our hope is the students are gonna answer in the long term. That's what ends up getting a higher score versus they're asking pointing out a goal very much in the short term, all right?
okay. Okay.
So, in that process, if you just put that question into ChatGPT saying, "Hey, I'm a college application," it's asking me what goals, it's not going to be focusing on the long term necessarily. It's not going to know their story. It's not going to know their personal characteristics. And so I think that's a great example of where if you use that, you're going to be at a big disadvantage in this process. And we've seen experience of that. We're seeing that students who are actually tying to their experiences on the application and everything else, and their goal is aligned with what they've done and where they're headed, they're gonna get a higher score. And so that's an important piece of all this, and that's what keeps us human in a lot of ways too.
So far, applicants to Virginia Tech, they seem okay with this use of AI. At least there hasn't been any big pushback. But other colleges that have used AI in admissions have faced some resistance. For instance, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill faced some heat last year over the use of AI to score grammar and writing style of admissions essays. In that case, rather than talk openly about its AI use, the university seemed to be doing it quietly. In fact, it only came to light after student journalists at the university's student newspaper, the Daily Tar Heel, wrote about the AI use in admissions. And student editors at the paper wrote an editorial last year criticizing the practice of using AI to score grammar and style in essays, writing, quote, "For admissions officers to even use a tool that frequently misreads and relays inaccuracies to the reader threatens every applicant's chance of admission. Until AI is further developed and reliable, it should hold no significant place in determining students' futures." These days, there's a growing call for admissions offices across the country to be more transparent about their AI use and to establish some new norms for the sector. For instance, the National Student Legal Defense Network, that's a nonprofit student advocacy group, it recently issued a list of do's and don'ts of AI in college application evaluation. Transparency was a big part of that, telling colleges they really need to tell students what the rules are. Right now, some colleges do make their stance clear and others don't. So at the moment, all this has applicants wondering what to do here. I asked Juan Espinosa what advice he would give applicants when it comes to using AI in their applications.
My advice is what I'm giving now. Use it as a brainstorming tool. I encourage you to explore this technology. But I will say that the fact that we've uh, engineered these questions to only have about 120 words as a response, so that's a short paragraph. The students aren't doing a writing sample. We're not asking them for a 5,000 word essay and getting them to circle back. Uh,
There's not enough words to judge their writing. That's not the
yeah,
goal.
yeah. This is about content. This is about the meat of their response. It's not
Okay.
meant to be a writing sample. In fact, we do not penalize for grammatical errors. That's not part of this review. If you're got a
That might surprise some of these applicants.
Yeah, I know, but for this portion, the essay questions, we're not really for the whole application, I guess, 'cause, this is the main place where you would have any grammatical errors. You're not penalized. You can have the wrong grammar, misspellings. We're focused on the content, and if we can still understand the content, and the message that you're trying to answer and deliver to us, that's what we're evaluating. That is a key portion of this, is making sure no one's at a disadvantage for misspelling or anything else.
I have to also ask, I'm sure you've seen this argument. There was an MIT economics professor who kind of knows this idea of the AI approach, and he worries that there's could be a if a lot of institutions start to go this route, that there could be a sameness because these models are trained a certain way, and it might make similar decisions
Mhm.
and maybe narrow applicant pools accidentally. Like there might be an unintended consequence of relying on these AI models over time because they could be, like even if you have a couple models that they're not humans. And so
I agree.
what do you say to that concern about kind of
I
homogenizing
mean,
it through
I think that
algorithms?
yeah, I think that is a very valid concern. Signal degradation on a lot of variables we're using right now. I mean, it's going to get tougher. We're already seeing that in a certain degree with grades. When you see so much grade inflation, you're not seeing a bell curve in grade distribution.
Right.
Uh,
So in other words, if there's not as much distribution on grades, they don't mean as much. They're not sending a signal. And so the same thing with these essays, you're saying.
exactly right. And I think as admissions offices, we're going to have to pay attention to that because we are in a path where our signals that we're utilizing in our review process, they're being degraded and how we're going to be able to evaluate that. And that's going to be a challenge, not just for the midterm, I would argue, but in the short term. And it's something we need to pay attention to.
Now, for better or worse, there is a whole cottage industry of admissions consultants and coaches who promise to help applicants improve their chances of getting into a selective college. And I was curious what these experts are seeing as far as AI and what they're recommending. I got on a short Zoom call with Sophie Sajnani, an admissions consultant who's helped hundreds of students apply to colleges, working with students and families from around the country on Zoom sessions. I started by asking Sophie what her initial advice was a year or so ago when students started asking her about whether to use AI.
So my initial advice when students asked that was I advised, no, you should not, because I wanted to preserve the creative aspect of the writing process.
You recently wrote an op-ed that I saw in the San Francisco Chronicle about how you've had a change of heart recently about AI. So what happened to bring you to that, and what is it?
The real moment where I had that change was actually a phone call. So between early admissions and regular decision, again, students were starting to use AI a lot more, and I wanted to make sure that they were protected because, again, sometimes it's hard to know what's happening on the admissions end, how they're perceiving these essays. So I actually spoke to someone high up at a private university in Boston. It was not an Ivy League university, but it's a very highly ranked one. It's very expensive. And on the call, they told me if a student uses AI, so they said something along the lines of, it is what it is. We can't judge them for it. We won't change our decision based on it. And the only way that we would find out is someone externally potentially complaining on the student or writing a tip. But otherwise, it is what it is. It's fair game. And that completely changed my perspective.
Sophie interpreted that to mean that AI is just part of the landscape now, and that at least for some colleges, they don't feel like there's a fair and accurate way to detect it.
I realized that this needs to be given to students because it's an advantage. In such a competitive admissions process, every advantage you can have, a counselor using AI is beneficial.
I asked her what she thinks using AI in a positive way would look like in college admissions.
For this, I would go back to, again, when I had that phone call, when I was thinking really hard about this, I had looked at a quote actually from a New Yorker writer, and she had talked about writing an essay about losing her mother and the grief she had experienced with it. And she had said for a long time she wasn't able to put this into words. And it wasn't until she had ChatGPT where she was finally able to give voice to all those emotions she had. It helped her write an essay about it. That being said, she said that all the ideas and all of the big statements, the really good parts of the essay were her own. And so I view AI like that, where those emotions, those original thoughts should come from the student. Just use AI to put that together and then also have essay drafts that you can pick from. That's something I spoke to in the SF op-ed, is that when students use AI, they should be thinking critically. They shouldn't just accept the output. They should ask, do you have another draft for this? Or use their own judgment and use my judgment to help push back on some of the writing. I think that's a very important part of the process too.
Now, she is giving students different advice than the Virginia Tech official I talked to when it comes to AI.
And I still believe that the brainstorming and the outlining process of the essay are the most important. I think that is where the creativity comes. And I don't think that that should be necessarily replaced by AI, which actually goes against what a lot of colleges state. A lot of colleges state you should use AI for the brainstorming or the outlining, just not to write that final draft. I'd say the opposite. I'd say that don't use AI for that. That's where the real work happens, the discovery. Use AI to just help you put those final words together. That's my take on it.
I guess the one thing that I do, I hear folks in the admissions world from the college side worry about is that AI could sort of flatten the thing they're looking for in this whole exercise, which is a glimmer of who this person is.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that concern as someone who's like working with students? I mean, is that something that now this tool is out there and maybe everyone's using it? So, but could that have this pretty big negative impact on the whole idea of college admissions? Really?
I would say to colleges that are thinking about that, about how AI could potentially flatten students' voices or not give them a full picture of the student's identity, I would say then it's on you guys to change the process. This is particularly coming from the essay. That's where students can show these things. So if that's a concern for them, then they need to change on their end. They can have students submit writing samples from their school assignments. They can bring back the essay section of the SAT, which was stopped a few years ago. There's so many things that they could do to change this process. If they're not going to put any of those changes in, then I think that the students have every right to use these tools. And I think that then they should expect that maybe the essay will look a little bit different, and maybe they have to change some of their internal rubric grading skills, or how they evaluate the essays. But I definitely think it's on admissions to figure out how to navigate the essays, and if this is something that they need to change potentially.
It's worth noting that so far, colleges have taken varied stances on how they see AI in admissions. So I would say applicants should check the website of any college they're applying for and try to find out what the policy is as this continues to shake out. When I talked with Juan Espinoza at Virginia Tech, who has seen so much rapid change around admissions and AI, I asked him what he thinks has been lost compared to his early days in the field.
Relationships were so big, and there's so much value in that. And I separate your relationships with counselors and relationships from students, right? So relationships with students, that's a win-win. The more opportunities you have to connect with students, that's the betterment of the institution and for the student as they're trying to figure out where they're supposed to be.
Sure, you mean like the more behind the scenes relationship here.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're looking at counseling, relationships, absolutely critical in making sure, back to my point, that we're aligning students' expectations with what they're going to get as a decision. And the best way to do that is having transparency with those key stakeholders in that process. But the lines can get blurry sometimes. And I would know for a fact sometimes there were some calls from counselors saying, "Hey, you really need to look at this student because they're amazing." And are they amazing because they're doing great things? Or are they amazing because you have a great relationship with them and they're your favorite, right? And then you start inserting bias and all of that. And I would argue that's not good for the system as a whole. And so I think as we start entering, and I would argue we're kind of exiting this period where data is king, right? Or that's the main piece of our decision making. Uh, as we gain these efficiencies in hours, I think relationships are going to be so key. And there's an economist, there's a professor of economics from the University of Chicago, Alex E. Moss, who just released an essay that I thought was really interesting. That talked, yes, you got people who think we're all doomed, right? We're all going to be automated and everything else, and you got other people that are declining as a group that said this is all hype, this is all going to fall apart, and then you got a bunch of people in the middle. He was essentially arguing that, yes, and I think it's pretty clear, there's a lot of automation that's gonna take place, right? And there are some people on that, on the fringes that would say, the field of economics is gonna disappear because scarcity no longer will exist. We're all gonna get whatever we want, right?
Right. We'll all get a minimum
Yeah.
basic income and it'll be great. Yeah.
And he does a really good job in explaining, no, yes, scarcities are gonna shift, but they're gonna still exist, this in a different way and in different areas. And one of the examples that they talked about was as we enter a more automated period, and let's try to use our field as an example. So as more things are automated, there's gonna be a sameness, to your point, not just from the student side, but from the institutional side, where we're gonna start our messaging is gonna start sounding very, very similar. And so I would argue that that opens the door, and he explained this brilliantly, where the relational sector is going to be well positioned for this. So you think of occupations that have direct reliance on relationships. So that's healthcare, education in general falls into that. So through
Mhm.
the lens of admissions offices applying this, that means as we get more hours, like I use us as an example, we're going to get 8,000 more hours than we had in previous years. How are we going to repurpose that to be well positioned for that relational sector? How are we going to make sure that as students are getting more sameness from universities, that we're differentiating by being there and having a relationship with them, giving them opportunities to connect with representatives of our university? So relationships are going to start becoming much more important. And I want to be clear, and I keep repeating myself, that doesn't mean relationships were important as data became more prevalent in this process,
Sure.
but it means that it reemerges as a lot more important, as that sameness starts coming from the institutional side, and as students receiving that they're going to start paying more attention to who am I having conversations with? Who am I going back to that earlier model, and it still exists today, obviously, of us going to high schools and going to college fairs. That interaction becomes so much important. Campus tours have always been important, right? As for students trying to figure out, if it's going to be a good fit. I think more investment in those areas. So as admissions offices are able to find some efficiencies in one area, they need to repurpose that. And I think prepare for this transition by making sure that they're investing more on the people side of things, not just on their recruiters, but institutions should be focusing on investing in faculty, making sure that that experience, that relationship, which is going to be the key in differentiating themselves from others, is going to be what students are going to be paying more attention to.
It feels to me like we're going to see more change in the next couple of years in terms of AI and admissions. Virginia Tech said it's going to be publishing more details on its approach so that others could replicate it if they want. And plenty of other colleges are doing AI experiments in their own as far as admissions. Of course, there are all these pressures on applicants and colleges to bring in some form of automation or use these tools. And I guess the big question for me is, can this moment of AI's arrival give a chance to rethink how the whole admissions process works and make it more human? This has been Learning Curve. Each episode, we tackle a big question around AI in education. If you don't already, I hope you will follow Learning Curve wherever you listen. And please take a minute to leave a quick review. I saw a new one the other day. These really help. Thank you so much. This episode was reported and put together by me, Jeff Young. Our theme music is by Kamaku, with additional music by Blue Dot Sessions. Our episode art was generated with the AI tool Midjourney. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode. Talk to you then.